What if the key to emotional stability, resilience, and inner peace wasn't just therapy or self care, but living in alignment with your deepest values? In this episode, Reverend Sherry Heller reveals how cultivating a personal code of ethics can become a powerful anchor for mental health, especially for survivors of trauma. Welcome to Happiness on Tap, where we bring you inspiring stories and practical insights for a happier, more fulfilling life. I'm your host, Leann Herron, and today I'm joined by the remarkable Reverend Sherry Heller, a registered clinical social worker, certified coach, hypnotherapist, ordained interfaith minister, playwright, and author. With more than 3 decades of clinical experience in New York City and now based in Montreal, Sherry has dedicated her career to supporting complex trauma survivors, individuals healing from addictive disorders, and those recovering from narcissistic abuse. Sherry's own journey of recovery, courageously shared through an animated short film aired on PBS, has inspired countless people to find strength in their values. She's written extensively on trauma, healing, and ethics with her books, A Clinician's Journey from Complex Trauma to Thriving, and Women on the Edge, offering deep insight into the human spirit's resilience. Today, Sherry and I are exploring the mental health benefits of living by a personal code of ethics, why it matters, how it fosters healing, and practical ways to create one that truly works for you. Let's welcome Sherry to the show. Sherry, it is so wonderful to have you joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Leann. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, for sharing your many years of knowledge, experience, and wisdom with my audience. I appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let's start at the beginning. For listeners who may not know your work, can you share a little about your background and how you came to focus on trauma recovery and ethics?
Okay. I guess I'll start with my personal history because that really was my life trajectory towards becoming a clinician, particularly in the field of complex trauma. I was born into abysmal conditions, unfortunately, where there was generational trauma, schizophrenia, cluster B pathology, a lot of history on both sides of my family with escaping pogroms, seeking political asylum. And so my early years were very fraught with traumatic abuse and neglect. And I had an epiphany, as many people ultimately do, to save myself at a very low point in my life. And I catapulted myself into a recovery process, enrolled in college, worked 3 jobs, basically had to leave my family in order to sustain myself. So this is a very kind of collapsed way of trying to articulate a very prolonged, extensive journey, which is a path towards healing from complex trauma, because I really did not have a sense of who I was, which is part of the process of reclaiming one's sense of morality and moral development. So in my process of healing, and I found a therapist I worked with extensively and went on to work with other people and did a lot of comprehensive work, or I think self-realization organically led me towards God realization. And I always wanted to understand, my mother was schizophrenic. I wanted to understand the conditions I was born into. At the point when I entered recovery, complex trauma was not a diagnosis. It was prior to 1994 when Judith Herman coined the term diagnostically. And so I hobbled together a treatment plan, and I was really trying to figure out what was done to me, what happened to me, who am I, and also to understand my family system. So that whole process led me to also wanting to transcend my conditions. And I think even through um, discovering my love for travel and my love of the arts, and I loved ballet, I started tapping into a sense of beauty in the world that opened me up to the transpersonal, also doing volunteer work, getting involved with people who are underserved, opened me up to my ability to love, which I think all spiritual paths share that common thread, which is essentially love. All the rest is really commentary. As an interfaith minister, it's interesting to see that in the variety of theology and mythology. But um, the pathway to self was a pathway to spirit. And that's how it opened up for me.
Oh, thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, my pleasure.
Uh, the more I interview people, the more I study myself and understand my trauma, the more we understand
Hmm.
that a lot of our traumas are very similar. I think that's the
Hmm.
connection that we share. But in that connection is a strength that, maybe we didn't feel we had growing up, but as
Hmm.
adults, it is the strength and power that I have accepted and welcomed into my life. Uh,
Hmm.
and I see that in you as well. And I agree that that path that we walk, that journey to understand the parts of us, the things that we experience, our family lineage, the history, all the individual traumas of each person in our lineage, provides a level of knowledge and understanding and
Hmm.
empathy, and just all those things that I I didn't understand as a child, but I certainly do as an adult. And
Yeah.
any chance I can to continue to learn more about it, so I have it for my personal growth journey, as well as to be able to share that information with the next person who connects to us in that same way.
Hmm. Yes. And I mean, that is what brings it full circle. And that to me is why we're here, on a fundamental level, to love and be loved, to generate these stories. Um, and I see it as a mythic journey, as Campbell has talked about, or Dr. Carol Pearson. And it is so important that we elevate our stories to a sacred place and see it as relevant in the grand scheme of things to everybody. So you're having this platform, it generates that energy where we get to connect. And I think the Latin derivation of the word compassion is to suffer with, and to suffer with in order to be able to also paradoxically open up to joy, and to help each other heal.
Yeah, and that is definitely my part of my guiding force, part of my mission, part of my
Hmm.
passion, um, to continue to bring on people like you to share their stories, to share their education, their knowledge, their lives experience, so that people aren't alone in this world. Because when we
Hmm.
isolate ourselves, when we feel like we're alone, um, that's when different paths open up that aren't healthy ones for growth and healing.
Right.
And so if I can share that information that somebody maybe even just stumbles across, then I've done my part in the world to help make that information available. Um,
Hmm.
and on top of that, I love the people I have had the honor of meeting and sharing our stories with. It is amazing. People all over the world, like I said, who share similar stories that connects us all in that path
Hmm.
of healing.
Hmm. Well, I think you're hitting on, such a strong fundamental truth about ethical development, which is, our life histories can either destroy us or they bring us to a place where we have strong conviction about our purpose. Your moral purpose, your ethical purpose is to generate these stories for the sake of healing. And that is born out of extensive complexity, right? I'm sure there's been a lot of suffering that led you to that place, as well as a lot of inspiration and life affirming experiences. So, I think that's the litmus test. It has to come from an intuitive, instinctual place, our morals. They are our guiding principles. And that's a guiding principle that is so fundamental to you that galvanized the need to create this platform, galvanized my need to become a clinician or to do a theater project with underserved women in New York. And we all have that within us, I believe.
Yeah.
An ability, and it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. It could be just in our everyday dealings with people.
And I did come across your theater project, and it was powerful,
Oh, thank you.
powerful. And I think I just sat in awe of your creation and could see what you put into it to help guide others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that for me, that was born out of when I was in seminary. Actually, I always loved acting, but I was very shy. I had a lot of stage fright. A lot of that had to do with some of the narcissistic dynamics in my family system. And so when I engaged with that project, it really was driven by a need not only to bring it to others to tell their stories and to have creative expression, but for me to break out of that pattern and to take that risk. And it was a tremendous project. I mean, it involved a lot of workshopping. We told our stories together. We found fairy tale, which I think is also a really incredible pathway into the subconscious. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And it had its shadow side as well, which was interesting, as things do when you get involved in entertainment of any kind, and things get co-opted. But that was a lesson in itself too, in terms of protecting intellectual property and standing in my authority. So there's always a light in the dark to contend with.
Yeah. And I can relate when you said that, part of walking the path that you did through this was overcoming what you grew up in, that,
Yeah.
and I completely understand that, because that too is the piece of what drove me to create this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
was overcoming living a childhood of being shamed about my
Yeah.
physical image, about my weight, um, and living a whole lifetime of not wanting to be photographed. So
Mm.
for 20 years of marriage, I owned my own home, and there wasn't a single photograph of me hanging on the walls in my
Wow.
home.
Mm-hmm.
To when I opened my coaching practice and realizing that it was my responsibility and my duty to be the face of my business, or how could I ever
Yeah.
connect with another person
Mm-hmm.
authentically. And so I hired a photographer. I had her, I gave up that fear, though, that shame that I had carried my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
trusted her in her profession to photograph me, to photograph my office, to show me as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then that grew into the podcast. Again, it was, okay, I need to overcome the shame that I've carried my whole life about my physical
Mm-hmm.
appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And this was another avenue for me to overcome that. And
Hmm.
Recently, um, an organization here in town had advertised free headshots if you would allow them to display the photos that they take for their advertising. Plus, they would add your photo to your image on their directory.
Hmm.
And I didn't even bat an eyelash and reached out and said, yes, I would love to do this.
That's great.
I showed up and I did the photo shoot and I stood in my authenticity, and, and to have the photographer walk in and go, I know you.
Mm.
Where do I know you from? We've met before.
Mm.
And just that feeling seen. And
Yeah.
it was just so amazing and such a power that I have gifted myself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It makes me think, Leanne, of how um, the whole trajectory of morality and ethics begins with the self. We have a moral responsibility to ourselves. And when you're born into abuse and neglect, there is so much moral injury, a term that was coined by psychiatrist Jonathan Shea. He started out with an application in terms of the military. He worked with Vietnam veterans, but it certainly has expanded to be inclusive of interpersonal trauma. And you reclaimed your right to exist, to be seen. And that is a moral imperative. And there are moral imperatives. I mean, people who are victims of complex trauma really lose sight of a personal sense of worth and value. And so, how can we then define what our values are, what our principles are, what we live by? It starts with loving the self, reclaiming the self. And that I think is so fundamental, and important to say here, that we can't know what our deepest intuitive and instinctual beliefs are and values are if we don't know who we are.
Yeah. And that was a journey for me.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
path that I walked for 3 years, coming out of a 20-year marriage, um, and really feeling lost in my own identity.
Hmm.
And, I had to
Yeah.
start there. I had to start with self and loving myself and getting to know myself and what my true values were and what I would and would not allow in my life going forward.
Right. The non-negotiables. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
I feel like listening to you, it makes me think about how I was steeped in survival fear, for so much of my life until I started, even in my early recovery. And from that place, you conform, you live by the rules because you want to dodge being a target of abuse. You learn how to comply, you learn how to fawn and to defer, to abdicate your power. And so it's such an act of courage to step into your truth and your authority. But to do that, it's not just anecdotal. I mean, it really is such an extensive process of excavation and healing. And part of it is also recognizing you were betrayed, right? You weren't on the receiving end of relationships with the very people who were supposed to care for you, who were supposed to elevate you and guide you towards recognizing the truth of who you are. Rather, you were led to um, dismiss who you are, to disown who you are, to accommodate parasitic agendas. So it's certainly more complicated for people who had histories of abuse. I mean, and I think that's certainly my story. I hear your story. Um, and so that's where getting to an ethical framework becomes more complicated.
yeah, yeah. So many of the words, the terms that, you brought out, betrayal trauma, like I didn't even, it's only been probably within the last year and a half that I came across the term betrayal trauma.
Mm.
and finally went for the first time, like, that's it. Like, that's the word I've been searching for my entire life. I always thought it was
Mhm.
abandonment, or it was this, or it was that, or,
Yeah.
to make sense of my childhood and into my adult years, because I continued to repeat patterns, which was just more betrayal trauma and more betrayal trauma. But I didn't even
Right.
realize that that's what it was. So again, these
Mhm.
conversations are so valuable, not only to me, but I know to others, because when we're living in it, that's what we know. That's all we know.
Yes, and then we can't hold others or ourselves accountable. If we don't see something as betrayal, we normalize it, we trivialize it, minimize it, then we can't possibly raise the bar. And to me, that is fundamental to mental health, to always grow, to heal. But if you're staying at this place of stasis, where you just are driven by the fear of transgressing another person's demands because they will harm you, and then you, of course, interject it when you're groomed, especially if you're born into a family where there is systemic abuse and neglect and betrayal, then you take it on. It becomes imprinted. So it is really an exhaustive process to be able to even recognize, to come to into a place of clarity of acknowledging the betrayal, because that is so devastating. That is a moral injury. That's something one of my favorite clinicians, who was a Jungian analyst, Marian Woodman, she referred to it as soul murder. So being able to repair soul murder is no easy feat. So, and it requires, as you articulated, so much risk.
Yeah. When you talk about personal code of ethics,
Hmm.
what exactly do you mean? And how is that different from societal or religious codes?
Okay. To me, I actually have my code of ethics that I printed out here. I wrote it 20 years ago, and I scoffed at the assignment in seminary. I thought, oh, this is just some kind of academic exercise that feels very cerebral, but it wasn't. It was actually life-changing for me. And what I mean by it is there are moral absolutes. How we personalize those absolutes, I think, is what lends itself to creating a code of ethics. For me, there's self-knowledge, generosity, charity, sexuality, respect, honesty, communication. These are generic terms, but what do they mean to us personally, intuitively, instinctually? Now, we culturally, there are prescriptions, religious prescriptions. There's all kinds of fall redemption theologies and ideas that are very dualistic or could be very punitive. Let's say we come from original sin as opposed to original blessing. Those things I found did not ascribe to me, and particularly as a woman, I found a lot of some of the teachings I grew up with really lent me to be a glorified atheist, and I stood proudly in that until I really found my voice through, I think, more female-centric spiritual paths, and that spoke to me, and earth traditions, which I always love nature, so that speaks to me deeply. But I think that a personal code of ethics is always born of self-reflection. It requires you to know yourself, as we were saying, to not just conform to rules. This is not about living by
Oops, something happened with your sound.
okay.
Okay.
So self-reflection really is fundamental to being able to identify what your principles are, what your guidelines are in life, your values, your ethics. And this can really differentiate you from the familial prescriptions, cultural prescriptions you grew up with. Um, and that can actually be lonely. I mean, living by your own ideals, while I think it is absolutely essential to recovery and growth, it is not always met well. by people who want you to accommodate expectations maybe that you co-created with them in the past, when you were more malleable and less aware of actually what your beliefs are. So it's a challenge, because it emanates from deep within your being. It is not about latching on to ideas that don't necessarily really align or resonate with who you are. So it is actually, it's courageous and bold to stand in your ethical convictions, especially when they don't align with the status quo.
Yeah, I can understand that. I had my own experience with that very young. Uh,
Yeah.
growing up in the Catholic tradition, going to Catholic
Mhm.
public school. And then I was taken out of Catholic public school in fifth grade, started sixth grade, or Catholic private school, and then started public school in sixth grade. And that's where I really started to question my beliefs. Were they my beliefs? Were they
Yeah.
the beliefs of the church? Um, and then I got pregnant very young. I got pregnant at
Mhm.
17,
Mhm.
and was immediately cast out um,
Mm.
in the church,
Yeah.
reprimanded. Just
Mm.
it felt like I was thrown away, as a
Yeah.
child. Uh,
Mhm.
but it really was one of the best doors that opened for me to become myself,
Yeah.
to look at my own interests. I'm aligned with you with, earth traditions and spirituality. And I started looking
Mhm.
at other religions and other traditions and things that I was in line with, that I was interested in. Uh,
Mhm.
and I found my own way. But there
Mhm.
were, over the years, many other people that would, you know, pass judgment or make me feel bad or, for my choices or whatever. And I just stood in my choices. I was like,
Right. It's great.
I'm not
Mhm.
asking you to walk in my shoes. I'm walking just fine in my shoes. And, I'm not
Mhm.
judging you. And I'm not, can't we just all get along? There just wasn't any need for
Apparently
this.
not.
Oh yeah, no, but that's okay. You know,
Mhm.
um, so
Mhm.
very young, I learned to stand in myself, stand in what I believed, stand in what I was
Mhm.
interested in. Um, and so yeah, it's a lot of self reflection. It's a
Yeah.
lot, um, but it can be such a beautiful journey when you just
Mhm.
start to understand things like your beliefs, your thoughts, your identity, and where do they come from? And is this really you living into your values, or are you living in someone else's
Yeah.
views, beliefs? Uh,
Mhm.
and I,
Yeah, and I think sussing through that is really important because, um, I mean, I was born into a Jewish um, religion, although in my family, my immediate family, there was so much chaos and insanity. I mean, religion was not really uh, essential to my life. Although when I lived with my grandmother, who was Orthodox, it was, and I always remember her praying at the candles, the brucha for the Shabbat. And I wasn't drawn to Semitic traditions, and I even repudiated Judaism and the Semitic traditions, including Christianity, although I found I loved the teachings of Christ when I learned about them in seminary. And I married a Christian man who was very Christ conscious, but also was hurt by the Catholic Church and left it for similar reasons as you described. And it's interesting coming full circle because I made a trip to Russia a few years ago. That's my background. And I really love Russian lineage. And I don't think I was able to embrace that part of me because I was spent so much of my time trying to find myself that I had to move away from my lineage and where I came from. So I almost feel that it's sort of paradoxical and ironic when you actually ground yourself fully in who you are, that you may find that there are certain tenets or aspects of what you grew up in that have some significance on a personal level. And that's eye-opening. You know, I think the more that you can have humility and really open yourself up and humble yourself to expansiveness, the more that you can become well-rounded in terms of your ethical blueprint and your sense of values and morality. But unfortunately, I mean, as we see in the world, human nature is such that we get locked into very rigid constructs. And it's hard for us to consider varied dimensions of thought, which is unfortunate. I think that's part of the pursuit of having a really strong ethical framework, is to think expansively and inclusively, but not always an interesting thing to do.
Yeah. And I have, been a lot more open-minded as I get older. I also, married a man who is very strong in his faith and beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
and I will join him at attending services and
Yeah.
support him in
Mm-hmm.
that he supports me in accepting me for who I am, for my
Mm-hmm.
beliefs, for my thoughts. And there's this respect that if something should come up that is a personal trigger, a trauma trigger, um, that he supports me in whatever I need in that moment. If it's to get up
Right.
and walk out, if it's, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I have found a connection with the minister that I don't think I ever had in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
but my husband's
Mm-hmm.
Protestant, which is very different than Catholic in the traditions of
Mm-hmm.
the church and the
Right.
traditions of the service. Um,
Mm-hmm. And the humanizing of Christ, which is
yeah,
an interesting aspect. Yeah,
but I
which is
have just
very
I have
different.
found a connection with this minister where I am at peace and I am able to be open to listen to him and how he teaches and how he talks. But I think a lot of it comes to his background is in education and working with children. So when he
Mm-hmm.
speaks at a level for everyone to
Mm-hmm.
understand, to connect with, as opposed to standing at the pulpit in a robe and speaking
Mm-hmm.
above you. So I
Right.
think that's been a very positive change for me. And I can
Mm-hmm.
listen to the stories that I had shut out so young in my childhood.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
and honestly, I think betrayal trauma, when that term came up, it came up in a story
Mm.
services. And
Wow.
but oh,
Mm.
okay,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
these spiritual texts are such repositories of wisdom. I mean, they speak of the human condition,
hmm
so yes, there is so much to be found. So I think it is important to not just try to be what we have to dispense with at first to survive and to find ourselves. Ultimately, we may discover has significant meaning for us and can inform us ethically. And I see that in a lot of the clients that I've worked with. And I do work with people who even come from paranormal backgrounds and who are dealing with a lot of activity with spiritual dimensions, and they fear being labeled psychotic. And I have to assess: is this psychosis, or is this actually a spiritual engagement that is incomprehensible to most people. And so to me, I guess one of my important moral ethics is that to not judge so quickly. I mean, we have to, of course, use judgment in life to discern danger, to be intelligently guarded. But I think it really is important, just as you said, you know, opening up to possibilities, even though you were pulled away from Catholicism or, Christian teachings, you were drawn to them later in life because you opened yourself up to take in what resonated with you. And I think that's the important thing, that we know what resonates with us. So it doesn't necessarily matter where it comes from. Well, I guess it does, if it's a cult, Um, or you're dealing with someone who wants to dupe you into thinking that they're benign. But then again, we need to be able to apply our moral principles to be able to detect those things. When is someone sincere, or when are they being manipulative? And I think we know that the more we know ourselves, and the more we have a clear idea of what real generosity looks like, and what does real honesty look like. There's a great saying, honesty without sensitivity is brutality. How our message is delivered. So to me, having that kind of sense of moral direction is so fundamental to not being reactive, and to be able to have discernment and discrimination, to know how to stay centered and safe.
I want to bring up, we talked about like, my mental health and recognizing if something's going to be a trigger. From your perspective, why does living in alignment with our personal moral compass, how does that benefit our mental health?
Well, it benefits our mental health because it carries with it the precedence that we are here to emulate higher truths, to emulate goodness, to not succumb to our lower impulses, and to be aware of our lower impulses, because we are born incomplete. We are fallible. We have shortcomings, and we always will as human beings. So having a moral compass is a roadmap to wanting to actualize our highest potentials. And self-realization, if we want to look at Abraham Maslow, and the hierarchy of needs, we start at the basic survival needs. And if we are in a trajectory of healing and growth, we will self-actualize. I don't think we ever stop self-actualizing. But that is the pinnacle of our existence, really, to become who we're meant to be, and to embody our fullness. So that is, mental health is, of course, it's not linear. It's a circuitous process. It's never ending. But to me, moral development is something that continues to evolve when we are regulated, we're stabilized, we are in touch with ourselves, and we are invested and committed to knowing fully who we are. It is an act of self-love, and it is a gift to others.
Yeah, it is a journey.
It's a journey. Yeah, and it benefits other people. It's not just about benefiting our own mental health, it contributes to the mental health of others. Even those who disdain another's power, and it is powerful to be in your ethics, in your moral truth. That is their journey. That is the mirror that they need to look in if they choose to.
What are some common obstacles people face when trying to live by their ethics, and how can they overcome them?
Well, I think the first thing you and I were really looking at is when you're banished from groupthink. Groupthink is a very strong obstacle and hurdle to get through when you individuate and you embody your truth and you deviate from a kind of a collective set of expectations and norms. And that could happen not just within a religious setting, could happen or a cult setting, but also in a workplace, within a family, um, within personal relationships. So I think the biggest challenge really is to hold a space for difference. And often that is people, I mean, of course, there are non-negotiables for people and there are deal breakers for people. And I mean, that is becoming more and more prevalent in the world that we live in, I think to our detriment, because I think it makes it difficult then to see beyond the lies and to see beyond kind of some uh, maneuvering that keeps people divided. And while we need to hold on to our non-negotiables and our deal breakers, I think we also need to give people the benefit of the doubt to try to be more engaged in discourse. But I think that is where, you know, as you become very clear in what your values are, um, that often is, I think, the biggest impediment. It's a lot of reactivity. There is a lot of reactivity in the world. There is a lot of selective outrage. There is a lot of dismissal. And so a lot of, I mean, I have found, and I find a lot of people who are on a path of self-realization find that they feel isolated in their efforts to really want to work through difficulties or to address differences. It is hard to find others on this path who really hold on to that kind of moral imperative, you know, to consider another person's reality or another perspective.
And I think
So
people,
at that, mhm,
I think people really struggle with having those difficult conversations.
absolutely, they're hard to have. And I think for me, like when I've had to have difficult conversations, um, I have to remind myself, okay, this is, I have to be honest. I cannot bypass this. This is a value of mine. I know that it's causing me anxiety, but I need to walk through this because it's more important to be truthful about what the issue is rather than to pretend. But I do think that pretending is something that seems to be preferable. It's easier. It seems easier, but it's really not. And it doesn't then strengthen that muscle to have a sense of conviction about your right to articulate your needs and your wants, your desires. And I mean, it'd be wonderful if we lived in a world where that was just completely obvious, but clearly it's not. So I think, as you were saying, it's not just being able to deal with other people's reactions, but our own fears that are stirred up in having to be truth tellers and having to erect a boundary or to identify a limit and to let someone know, hey, you've crossed this line with me and we need to address this. And that is part of, I think, fundamental to any kind of ethical development is that you need to be willing to risk saying what others don't want to hear.
Yeah. I actually still really struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Me too.
it goes back to my childhood,
Yeah.
not knowing how to have boundaries, not having a voice of my own,
Mm-hmm.
um, being raised to be seen and not heard, being
Right.
raised where my needs, my wants, and my desires weren't important. That,
Yeah.
you know, I was supposed to put everyone else first, and just all of that. My, you know, first half of my life was living in
Yeah.
that world, not wanting to say something to hurt someone else's feelings, always saying yes to everything, even though I wanted to say no, or it wasn't
Hmm.
something I was interested in, or and just being like, okay, no, I just need to say yes and go and do, regardless of my feelings, my wants, my needs, and my desires. And that is something I that comes up all the time. Learning
Yeah.
how to have those boundaries, learning how to stand in your boundaries, learning how to communicate
Hmm.
those boundaries after living a lifetime of silence and
Yeah.
shutting down those feelings and wants and needs and desires. And it truly wasn't until I came into this relationship with my current husband that I ever had someone in my life who really wanted me to stand in myself, who
Yeah.
not only welcomed, but that was part of what we agreed in our relationship was going to be something that was expected of me, was to
Hmm.
stop shoving down those wants, needs, and desires, and learning how to communicating and having a partner who gave me the space, but also the support that I needed
Yeah.
when I struggled with saying those things. And sometimes it was as simple for me as taking the time to write those feelings down
Yes.
and
Yeah.
practicing saying those things, even if it was saying it into a mirror, speaking it out loud until I became comfortable to
Absolutely.
where I could have those conversations. But that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's still not difficult. Like you said, it is that muscle that we have to continue to
Hmm.
use and
Hmm.
utilize to grow in our
Absolutely.
journey.
Yeah. And I love the what you said about your husband because that's the beauty of having a moral compass, because you benefited from your husband's moral compass, which is for him to elevate you, to elevate others, so that they can be themselves, not to match what he wants. But that truly is, he's operating from an ethical framework that's so important to highlight. But when you obviously weren't born into that type of system. And so to reclaim, even as you're saying, it makes me think about how you become so disembodied from systemic abuse, from betrayal, that you don't even know when you're uncomfortable, right? Your nervous system goes into freeze, flight, fight, or fawn. You're so discombobulated that you don't even have a sense of discomfort. Often, I think that's something, and even being able to articulate a boundary is just simply learn these kind of sound bites. I'm not comfortable. I need some space because it doesn't happen in real time. It's not going to happen in real time for quite some while that you even know what it is you're uncomfortable with. But you have permission to be able to say to someone, I'm uncomfortable and I'll get back to you. I need to really reflect on this. Um, but it is, as you're saying, it is a prolonged process of excavation and discovery. And I think finding people along the way who, like your husband, who are able to um, offer you or extend to you their morality in this way, their fundamental beliefs in a person's right to exist for themselves. That is a tremendous gift, and it spurs us on to want to do the same.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely consider it a gift that he gives me on a daily basis. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
he gives me the strength that I never knew I had within myself.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds me of the importance of having my own voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's something I never knew I could have or
Mm-hmm.
experience or had another person like that in my lifetime growing up that showed me those things. And
Right.
even teachers, other professionals um, didn't show me that my voice was important.
Yeah. And that's a shame, especially hearing, that one can reach out to healers who have their own agendas that they impose on those who really need to immerse themselves in self-discovery and have a witness, to that process who can validate. But it is such a precious gift, what you're describing with your husband. I'm grateful. I feel that with my husband as well. And I never thought I would have that. I never thought I would be with someone who can hold that space for me and encourage me to stand in my power and my truth. Um, so I think that is ultimately what having an ethical framework is about, is that we become what we need to generate in the world, what we need to provide for one another. And that sounds cheesy, I know, but that is, I think, ultimately from a spiritual perspective, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. And I like how before we got off on my topic, you were talking about that openness to be accepting of others when our opinions, our beliefs vary, and be
Yes.
able to have those conversations, um, and just accept that somebody's not going to believe the same beliefs that we have, that
Mm-hmm.
we can learn from each other in those difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard right now in this very divided world in which we're living, um, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to sit across the table from somebody that has a very, very different view of their belief system, their world,
Mm-hmm.
and being like, okay, I know we have a difference of opinion,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. Um,
Right.
but it's just so rare to see.
Yes, it is rare. And I think that's the critical piece, that it is about, you don't have to change your mind necessarily, but you can learn from others. I remember, you're making me think of when I used to work at a Lutheran hospital many, many years ago in New York, and they asked me to do an in-service, and I decided to do it on spirituality and addiction, and how kind of the fall redemption theologies of, hell and brimstone and heaven kind of mimic a shame-based system that catapults one into addictive processes. And anyway, so my supervisor said, well, the clergy in the hospital is going to show up for this. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to hate this. But they were so gracious. They were so wonderful. They really, and then one of the parish ministers, I don't remember if he was a minister or a priest, he asked, we went out for lunch and we were talking about my ideas. And it was really just a wonderful exchange. And I think that is essentially, ideally, what, if we could all bring to the table the willingness to hear each other, that is a fundamental ethic to live by.
Yeah. What first steps would you recommend to a listener who wants to start crafting their own code of ethics if they've never
Mhm.
sat down and really done that introspection?
Well, again, I think it also depends on where someone comes from, because if you come from histories like you and I, where you were very disembodied and fragmented, you have to start a process of self-discovery, of self-realization and healing. Um, but once you become embodied, and I mean that from a somatic perspective, where you begin to identify what your body is communicating viscerally, sensorially, so you know when you feel uncomfortable with something, you know when a line is crossed, you can begin to tap into your intuition and your instincts. You're reclaiming your instinctual awareness. Then I think it is important to start really being mindful, of course, mindfulness practices, either through meditation, body work. I did a lot of journaling, which I loved for many years because it also helped me document episodes in my life where I felt spiritually, ethically violated, and also perhaps to examine my own behavior where I felt I transgressed my own values. So a lot of this is self-reflection, self-examination, reclaiming instincts. I created an altar. An altar became a place for me where I could pray and meditate. But also, I also encourage people to do a lot of creative arts. I have one of my clients who is a collage artist, and I feel collage is a great vehicle for that as well, even being able to identify images, what is beautiful to you, what resonates for you. So I think it all comes down to a process of anchoring yourself and knowing who you are through a variety of different techniques and modalities, self-discovery. And that is going to be, I think, an organic pathway to knowing what truly matters to you and what violates your sense of purpose and meaning. You know, what interferes with that? And that's where I think the boundaries and the limits are important to start really concretizing. What interferes with upholding tenets of respect, of honesty, of tolerance, of diversity, of kindness. I mean, I'm looking at my list: humility, um, responsibility and discipline, lifestyle. What is it in the grand scheme of your life is an impediment, and what is a source of inspiration to that?
I hadn't thought about when I first came out of my 20-year marriage. I spent 3 years in self discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I wrote my own code of ethics.
Mm.
And I still have that piece of
Oh,
paper.
wonderful.
Um, but I, of course, have put it away and hadn't thought about it. But when it does come up and I do take it back out and I do look at it, I'm always happy to see that for the most part, I am living in those things that I wrote down
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
7, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's great.
and it's nice to be able to revisit it, pull that piece of paper out, look at it and say, am I truly living in these values?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I still allowing myself to have external things come up and pull me out of that? Or am I truly living in it? And
Yes.
it's nice to have that. And I did a lot of, like you said, learning about somatic practices. That was a new modality to me.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to listen to my body. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that came with, really learning how to meditate. I had never meditated before in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, learning how to do an inventory in that
Mm-hmm.
silence and listening to my body and saying, okay, where am I holding on to this? What am I holding on to? How can I
Right.
learn to release these things that are trapped in my body through breathing practices? So learning all these different beautiful
Right.
modalities. Art therapy was definitely another one that I spent
Yeah.
a lot of time just allowing myself to live in that creativity that I had so stifled for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
And
this, I think, the richness of who you are then lends itself to your being able to look at the repository of wisdom in the world, mythology, philosophy, reading other people's ethics, Taoists, and seeing, oh, what really feels aligned with who you are. So again, it is, I think there are, of course, so many teachings out there that we can avail ourselves of. They're endless. But how do we know if they really truly matter to us if we don't have that sense of being anchored in our relationships to ourself? And so that has to be, and that's why self-realization truly is the path to God realization. And part of that is knowing who we are morally, what our moral ideals are, because as that is an organic trajectory in our development, in our healing, to become the people we're meant to be, which are, to offer light into the world, which means we also have to temper our own darkness and know that and be honest with ourselves. We all have a dark side. We all have, we're all fallible. We all have shortcomings, and we have to take responsibility.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Where can people find you, Sherry? I want to make sure that I include in the show notes all the ways that people can find you, learn more about you, um, see if they're interested in working with you and just learning more from you.
Mm-hmm. Well, the best way to reach me is through my websites because I have everything about me there and all my links and my expansive breadth of work that I've done is all on the website. And that's at sherrytherapist.com. It's one word. I spell my name Sheri. So I welcome, your viewers, anyone out there to visit my site and to say hello. I'd love to hear from you.
I know you're also on Medium and that you have a lot of stuff that you've published there as well.
Yes.
So I will make
Medium is on my site as well. I have a blog on Medium that is pretty popular. And I write extensively about psychology and mental health, sometimes about the cultural landscape and what's going on in the world. And um, that is also a place where I'm able to articulate my perceptions, my reality, my morals, and it runs the gamut.
Wonderful. I will make sure and include all of that information in the show notes. I want to thank you for this powerful conversation, for sharing your life, your story, your education, your experience, your views with my audience, for reminding us that living in alignment with our deepest values isn't just a moral choice.
Mhm.
It's a mental health choice. For our listeners, I encourage you to reflect on the principles that matter most to you and how you can bring them into your daily life. I will include links to all of Sherry's information so you can learn more about her work, her books, her resources, and connect with her on social media as well. As always, I hope this episode helps you keep your happiness on tap. Is there any final words that you would like to leave the audience with, Sherry?
I guess that everything we're talking about to me is the most noble quest, which is the quest to find oneself and to be oneself. And that I think is the greatest moral imperative. And everything else emanates from that place.
It really does. And it's a beautiful journey. Just,
Mhm.
you know, be lean into it, be curious, um, try to step out of that fear and that shame, um, because there's so
Yeah.
much knowledge out there that we can learn from, learn about ourselves, learn about others. Um,
Mm.
it is truly a beautiful journey, even though it can be very difficult.
Yes.
Um, but, as we talked about, being able to have those difficult conversations, not only with others, but with ourselves, uh,
Right.
is a beautiful space in which we can live and share with others. And so again,
Mhm.
I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here and sharing your information with my audience.
Thank you, Leanne. It's been great talking to you.
It
It's
has
been
been
a
great
wonderful
talking
time.
to you, and I loved sharing our stories and hearing just everything you had to share. It was very powerful for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.